Okay, this is the second video I'm going to responsible make to you, Golden, about the other issues you brought up in your 15-minute heart song about everything you believe politically. The four topics that I have that I didn't respond to in the last one were war, environmental regulation, food taxes or fast food taxes or whatever you were talking about, and public transportation. Okay. Now I suppose I could make an individual video on each, but because I realize that you just apparently use your raw emotions and don't actually use your head, it wouldn't matter that I speak about. It wouldn't matter if I spoke 10 minutes about each individual subject or 2 minutes. So I'm going to try to make a response to all four of these in about 10 minutes. So let's start with your food tax plan. You stated that, well, you stated two things. You stated that food is unhealthy, so we should tax it, and two, you somehow stated that food prices are artificially low. Well, what the hell does that mean? Okay, when you're saying that something's artificially low, you're saying that some third-party force is affecting the price other than the market. Okay, a tariff would make a price artificial. The taxes that you advocate for would certainly make something official. The fact that Burger King can make a 80-cent double cheeseburger and charge $1 for it and make 20 cents a profit certainly doesn't mean anything's artificial. It means that they're very thrifty in making burgers that people are willing to buy. In regards to your food taxes, number one, this is simply another nanny escapade that's failed every other time we've tried it in history. Okay, we thought that banning drugs was good for humanity and good for health reasons, and what happened? Well, now we have a massive black market for drugs. People are still buying them. The war on drugs has failed. It's pointless. We shouldn't be fighting it. We tried to ban alcohol about 80 years ago. How'd that work for us? We fucking repealed it because, again, it went against human motivations and human action. And essentially, whenever we try to ban something that people really want, guns, any type of food product, it never works, okay? Because again, you think that magically the government can pass a law and everyone's going to follow it. Well, that didn't happen for drugs. It didn't happen for prohibition. Why you think it would work this time is beyond me. And if you advocate something like a tax, like making double cheeseburgers cost $4 instead of $1, well, number one, all that's going to do is hurt the poor people that buy the double cheeseburgers, okay? Some people can't afford to eat anything else, and those are the ones that will frequent the dollar menus at McDonald's and Burger King. So number one, your tax would just hurt poor people. Number two, you have to remember that everyone has a choice to live their lifestyle the way they want. I don't know how you live your life. I'm certain I wouldn't agree with everything you do. But at the same time, I don't think I have a right to tell you how to live your life as long as you're not forcing your beliefs on anyone else through some type of force. Okay? Again, if people want to be fat, then let them be fat. If you're worried about paying for their health costs, you've made a great, as Nick Gillespie said on Stossel a couple weeks ago, you make a great argument for getting rid of Medicare and Medicaid, and then we no longer have that problem. So again, food taxes, all they're going to do is hurt the poor, and again, they're not going to stop people from eating these fast food products, so it's a waste of time anyway. Number two is war. Now, apparently in your video, you made the assumption that I support the wars currently going on in the world, and how you got that is beyond me. Again, but then again, everything you've said so far is an assumption, not based on any semblance of logic, so this shouldn't surprise me. However, if you took the time to read my comments, I immediately responded to you, stating that I did not support the wars that we were fighting, and I stated that war was about as big a waste of money as a national health care would be, okay? So we actually found something that we somewhat agree on. However, I strongly disagree with your argument that if we ended the war, say we just ended the war in Iraq and Afghanistan tomorrow, that we would suddenly have the money for health care. Those wars were already running up deficits long before healthcare reform in America got into the picture. Okay, it doesn't matter if you run. It really doesn't matter if you run a deficit fighting a war, or running a deficit for national healthcare. Both of them are unsustainable. On top of that, there are numerous nations that are currently not engaged in wars, or with the exception of Britain, who is not spending as much money or anywhere near as much money for us. None of their systems are sustainable at the moment either. In Canada, there's big talk about the so-called private option they want to try to lower costs. At the end of this year, the National Health Service in England is predicted to be running a deficit between 7 and 9 billion pounds. In nations like New Zealand and Australia, 30 to 40% of people still have private health insurance. Again, how is this keeping costs low if you have a National Health Service program, but people still are paying for private health insurance? Something is clearly wrong. And the best example of this is Taiwan, whose system is the most unsustainable right now in the world. It's predicted that it's going to fail probably within this decade. And the hysterical thing is that the Taiwanese government refuses to get rid of it because the politicians are worried about getting voted out of their seats, which is, of course, the greatest motivation of any politician, is to keep his seat and not actually do anything intelligent. So, again, I don't believe this argument that if we weren't fighting these wars, we'd be any more, we'd have any more money to throw into healthcare. And again, these healthcare systems, these giant entitlement programs, are always unsustainable because they always create the perception that it's free. But as you may or may not know, the piper must always be paid. Okay, and there's certainly they in places like Canada, they pay for it by denying surgery, by rationing care, by raising taxes. None of which create a sustainable program in the long run. In regards to public transportation, the example I'll use is the one that's in the city I currently live in Chicago. In Chicago, we have something called the Chicago Transit Authority. It's so good that it goes bankrupt every 6 months, literally. The CTA will always come to the Illinois government and state that we're out of money, we're going to have to fire all these workers, we're going to have to cut service, and it has to get a raise out of general taxation or deficit spending every 6 months to sustain itself because they don't charge high enough fares for riding the bus. In fact, a couple weeks ago, they did the worst cut that they've ever done in the history of the CTA, I guess, when they reduced service on every single bus route and fired 1,000 CTA workers. And there's a big outroar about that because they were unionized. And you know what those unions will do. You go against a union, you'll end up in a fucking landfill next week. But in other words, the CTA certainly is not sustainable. Why? Because they have no incentive to live within their means. Okay, they're providing it for public good, not for profit. So whenever you provide something for public good, people tend to abuse it. There's a lot of corruption within the CTA. Not only that, they don't run sustainable business practices. If you're not taking in enough revenue to justify the service, two things have to happen. You either have to raise the fares to try to see if you can make profit, so you have a reason for running the business, or you have to shut the business down. Of course, in public enterprise, you never do either of those things because you argue it's against the public good. Well, the public good is rarely, if ever, sustainable. Certainly in the CTA's case, it isn't sustainable. There are many other cases of this in public transportation. Amtrak is the big one. They have railways to nowhere that politicians won't get rid of because, again, it doesn't look good if you're a congressman running for re-election. These high-speed trains we want to build with taxpayer money, they've built similar ones out in Portland. No one fucking rides them. In fact, transportation in Portland, use of public transportation went down after they built these trains as opposed to up, so it didn't do shit. And again, you're basically telling people what they want, regardless of if they want it. If they want it bad enough, a private entrepreneur has a big incentive to come in and provide it for profit, and the people will use it. And if they don't want to use it, then he goes out of business, and then no one's hurt by it. Again, this doesn't happen in public enterprise. So public transportation, again, a horrible idea that doesn't work. Last subject, environmental controls. You're someone who either I don't know what you advocate, carbon tax or cap and trade. Well, cap and trade didn't work in Europe when they tried it. It didn't stop emissions from going up. All it did was raise the price of fuel that jerked around for a period of months, and it didn't actually solve any of the problems because the carbon emissions didn't go down. If you advocate a carbon tax, again, this is a tax that's going to fall heavily, heavily on the poor. So if you're someone who really cares about the poor, you wouldn't be advocating a tax that they're going to be fucked with because they're not going to be able to afford it. And again, this argument that we're damaging the earth, I'm not going to go into the debates over global warming here because I don't feel like it. But let me state this. Even if you want the carbon tax to, say, encourage alternate forms of energy, you have to understand that the oil companies have no incentive to pursue those new technologies at this time. Okay, I know everyone says, well, solar and wind, they're the future. Well, they're decades away. We can't produce enough electricity to power electric cars and power all of our general electricity through solar and wind power. Okay, optimistically they're 3 to 4 decades away, and the technology is nowhere close. We could try to build some nuclear power plants. And apparently Obama wants to do that, I guess. He wants to put up loan guarantees for 2. But again, people like you, I'm sure, will protest those and go against those, and we won't build them. So, what the fuck does it matter? But anyway, what I'm saying is when the market encourages someone to pursue a different source of energy, like when oil sources start to get really, really low, then the market will provide for companies that will want to try to pursue other types of energy. The difference is that we're not at that point now. I don't deny that oil is not infinite, but we're certainly not at that point where we're running out of oil. I don't think we've hit peak oil yet. We've said that for decades, and we keep finding more and more oil. When we do run out of oil, I have no doubt the market will provide for an alternative. So, anyway, this is the response I'm making to your comments. Let's see what non-logical answers you have for me this time.